The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
I'm trying to think of what age I was, but what age is it when little boys are really into playing in sandboxes? I was really into my sandbox when I was a kid. Maybe 18, 19. I guess I was like 7 or 8. Spent a lot of time building all kinds of things. And at one point, I don't even know where I got the idea, but I saved up some of my pennies and I bought some little plastic soldiers. You know, some were kneeling with rifles and some were lying down with rifles and so forth. And my mother told me later that my father was really upset that I did that. And I couldn't figure out why. Obviously, my father's attention was important to me, and it upset me that he was upset. But I didn't find out why until later. And I want to talk a little bit about that in the context of this practice of meditation. We talk about in meditation that there are two fundamental wings. And one is the wing of wisdom. That's seen clearly. And one is the wing of compassion or kindness or a heart that can hold what it is that you see. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how this practice can be quite dramatic in helping you see more clearly, to transcend your conditioning, your preferences, your embellishments, and see what's really here. But it's also a practice of developing your capacity to hold what you find. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the practices that actually help you to see clearly and some of the practices that help you to develop the heart. So I was so puzzled why my dad was upset. I knew that he had been in World War II. There were like adult conversations about it, but he never talked about it. And both my parents were Quakers, and they were both they became draft counselors during the Vietnam War to help people if they wanted to be conscientious objectors. They were very kind of politically active. And certainly there was a lot of conversation around the Vietnam War, and my father was pretty engaged with that. But I didn't have a sense of what was behind it all. And have you ever wondered what motivates people, why they are the way they are? You know, as I often say, how some people are just outrage waiting to happen. You know, and some people are rejection waiting to happen, and some people are depression waiting to happen. And what happens in meditation is we begin to actually recognize what's there. If you've ever had that experience where maybe you're angry and you go to meditate, and of course you're visited by all the thoughts of anger and all that goes with it. And as you sit with it, you might recognize, oh, wait a minute, there's some hurt here. You know, there's some shame here. You begin to see what's actually going on beneath the story. That's what the practice can do. We are absolutely driven by unseen and unfelt and undigested forces in our lives. We're just conditioned machines. And if we live an unexamined life, our whole life is simply living out of reaction. I think it was Hegel who said that everything that you do is to soothe your anxiety. Everything that you do. And so, in an unexamined life, we are running from pain, imagined pain or real pain, and we're chasing pleasure, real pleasure or imagined pleasure. It's only when we stop that we can begin to sense what's really going on. And we have those moments in our lives. One day where we ask simply, whose life am I living? Am I just living out the life that was programmed in me by my parents or my culture? Sometimes something wakes us up. Quite often it's death or sickness or old age. And it begins to open up this deep question of what does it mean to be me? And what does it mean to be true to myself? And then the path begins. Then we really start examining, well, what is true? What do I want? Who am I unconditioned? And that's when it gets really interesting, too. So when I was about 10, I found in my dad's library, I found this book that had all these pictures from World War II. And there were just, shots of, young men standing together, of different platoons and troops and stuff like that. And I was kind of flipping through the pages. And there was one shot, and it was a whole, in the book, it was 1/2 page of this soldier crouched in these ruins of a smoking ruins of a church, holding one of those big field radios. And I was just looking at that picture. And my dad just happened to be walking by, and he said, "Oh, that's me." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, they had me pose for that picture. I actually wasn't a radio man, but they needed someone for that shot, so they just told me to get over there and hold the radio." Suddenly I thought, wow, this guy has lived a life I know nothing about. Suddenly I began to sense, wow, there's something here I hadn't seen before. So many, many years later, when I lived in an ashram for a couple of decades, and my father came to do a retreat, and I think he was maybe in his 70s, and I wasn't leading the retreat, but he was taking this retreat, and he sort of became the mascot of the group, and then one evening he came into my room and just started talking. Story after story after story. He was drafted at age 18 and immediately shipped off to Italy when he was wounded in Italy, and patched up and put right out there again, and then moved to the invasion through southern France, through Saint-Maxime, and kind of like making their way as fast as they could up into Germany. And along the way were booby-trapped bridges and all kinds of really, really scary stuff. And lots of skirmishes and fighting and so forth. But and there he would just tell me again, story after story, these bouncing Betty mines, where when they were triggered, they would come up waist high and then scatter, when they would go off. And one went off right next to him and didn't explode. It just went up and didn't explode. Other times, the people he got really close with, many of them died, and he found many of them dead, and he told me the stories. And I was almost named Clyde from one of his best friends. Thank you for not naming me that. And then he was right on the banks of the Rhine River, and part of the major invasion into Germany, where they sent boats across the Rhine with no life preservers, no training whatsoever, just loading up these boats. And he was part of the first wave at 2 a.m, and his boat took a direct hit, and he was the only one who survived. And they found him 5 miles down the river, filled with shrapnel and so forth. So they patched him up again and put him out there again, and he was there right after they liberated Dachau. Having these stories, and suddenly seeing what I had felt about my father the whole time, his own PTSD, very, very bright, funny English professor, but pretty cut off from his emotions. Just seeing clearly, as you can imagine, my heart just exploded. It just kind of made sense, and my heart responded. This is kind of what our practice is all about. We sense something, and we begin to investigate it. We begin to sense it. The analogy I maybe overuse, but it's so helpful, I can't think of a better one, from Joseph Campbell of the big circle with the line through it. Above the line is everything you're aware of, and below the line, it's everything you're not aware of. Everything that's unseen and unfelt. Meditation, mindfulness, non-judging awareness, whatever you want to call it, that's what moves the line. You relax and you pay attention. You start to feel things you hadn't felt before. You start to notice the circular thoughts and belief systems you hadn't noticed before. What's undigested in your life is now available because the line has shifted. So much of what we need to do is to cultivate this capacity to stay with our experience as it's happening, but also to find ways to kind of resource ourselves so that we can stay with it. Once we really understand, quite often there is a resonance in the heart. I love the stories of people who are in conflict and they begin to develop a friendship. There's a wonderful story, it was in the New Yorker, of the son of a very prominent right-winger, a very, very bright kid. Went to college in Florida. And there was someone who was an Orthodox Jew. And they developed a friendship. Over a few years, they explicitly did not talk about politics, or they didn't talk about their beliefs. But as they became closer in friendship, they could begin to inform each other of what their experience was like. And once they did that, the transformation was incredibly powerful. From this young man who was really born in a culture of hate, to begin to befriend and see through a new lens. So we train ourselves to see the self and other in self. And one of the things, back to World War II, the strategy during World War II was to conserve your ammunition. So all these conscripts were trained, you choose your shot and take your shot. They had a really, really big problem in World War II. And that was to actually get these young men to pull the trigger. It was actually a real problem because they hadn't made enough of the enemy to kill. And so after World War II, they started to create more psychological training so that you could numb yourself to the other. So now, as opposed to carefully take your shot, you lay down fire. You just lay down fire. That's the strategy now. So that the desensitizing became very, very important over the course of modern warfare. And kind of what we're doing in our lives is we're sensitizing ourselves, which inevitably is a side effect of a meditation practice. You see more clearly, you feel more fully, which isn't necessarily fun. So how do we see more clearly? Part of it is around having an intention. A friend of mine once told me he went with a friend into some wharf in San Francisco, and there was a fortune teller. And so they thought, oh, this will be fun. They went in to see this fortune teller, and the fortune teller said, before we begin, do you just want the good news, or do you want the truth? And he told this whole story of how they said, we want the truth. And the psychic told them some really, really hard stuff. But at some point in our lives, we decide we want the truth. We would rather wake up than not wake up. And this is where we begin the practice. So when you begin to look at, well, what is real? And we look at the very practice of meditation, the meditation we did earlier today. How do we access the present moment? In this tradition, you access the moment through the body, because the body only knows the present moment. The body doesn't live in the past or the future. So when you are intimately connected to the here and now, you're here and now. And so as you develop resilience, you begin to notice when you're not here and when you're here. There's very, very, almost a binaural practice. Either your attention is in the cognitive and the story and the narrative, or it's actually engaged, resting in presence. It's kind of that simple. But what happens if you stay with it? Because we get little moments that are wonderful. But when you stay with it and you learn to relax and stay, you become more self-aware. And you begin to notice kind of the qualities and characteristics of reality. And according through this particular lens, one of those is the recognition of change and impermanence. You begin to see how this mind is not very trustworthy. It's just generating thoughts and commentary nonstop. And you also begin to see how sensations change and moods change and different states of consciousness change, and everything is changing. Just seeing that can be so powerful. And remembering that when you're really, really down, it's going to change. And when you're feeling like you've arrived, that too is going to change. The next thing you begin to see as you begin to slow down and pay attention is your relationship to what's changing. And you get to see that any time you either want something to change or you want something to not change, you are generating some form of dissatisfaction or stress in your body and in your mind. That recognition as well. So simple, but so profound. Anything you resist will persist. Anything you're holding on to is going to result in rope burn, depending on how tight you're holding. If you're holding on really tight, it's really going to burn. If you're holding on just a little bit of a burn. And then where it starts to get freaky is you begin to sense, well, where is awareness? What is it that's aware? Here you are in your body. Here you are aware of what's changing. Here you are aware of this reaction. Well, but where is awareness? Is awareness here? Is it in your body? What is it that's aware? That's something that very, very easy to get mental and get philosophical. But it's also an invitation to simply inquire. Is there something in the world of what's changing? Is there something that doesn't change? So in meditation, we often begin with a fixed point of awareness. You choose an anchor, a breath or sound or feeling, whatever anchor you choose, and that becomes the starting point. Because when you focus your attention on one thing, and then you begin to widen your awareness, you start to become aware of foreground and background. Once you're aware of one thing, you can begin to notice everything that's changing around it. So I like to think of this practice of seeing clearly as really kind of three stages. There's focus, which is calming and gathering, very empowering. And then there's flow. When you begin to notice what's changing, your attention shifts to the witness, to the observer. And then the third stage is your capacity to let be, just to rest in presence. So the desire to know what is true. This is what fueled the Buddha and has fueled all great mystics, is that determination. This practice of meditation is not for the faint of heart. It's one of the most grueling things you can do. If you've ever done a long meditation retreat, they are amazingly grueling because it's just you and reality. But the payoff is huge because you do begin to see more clearly. The sediment, the muddy mind, truly begins to settle. And then it begins to point toward how you can hold what you find. The acronym that we use a lot in this world of meditation is the acronym of RAIN. The R is to recognize or realize what's happening, the seeing clearly part. And then once you see it, to really inquire, can you allow or accept what's going on? And here it's always important to point out that sometimes when you're practicing meditation, when you're deeply engaged in non-judging awareness, and you begin to recognize something below the line that starts to come up into awareness, sometimes you can't allow it. Sometimes you can't accept it. It might feel like it's too much. It might feel like it's too traumatizing. And there it's very helpful to let it know you see it. Let it know another time when the conditions are different, that you can be with it. But to set it aside. The I in RAIN is to actually investigate. And this is what sets Vipassana or insight meditation apart from just concentration meditation. And that is where you can turn your attention to really investigate, well, what is this experience? What is this experience of sadness or this experience of restlessness or sleepiness? Let me get to know this better. Let me get familiar with this. So the primary investigation is how it lives on the inside. And again, how you're holding it. The N in RAIN is to nurture what you find with compassion or kindness. So, just a little story, and then we'll have a little practice to kind of end. This practice of RAIN is something I've certainly been around a lot with my wife, who's sort of the queen of RAIN. And so we've been practicing together some of the different ways of approaching this. So the other morning, we have a kind of a twice a week little meditation and check-in. We thought we would each do our own little meditation on this. And And so I was thinking about, I have a number of big events that are starting very, very soon, and I had some anxiety around it. And I thought, well, I think what I might do is take some time to kind of center, and then I'll sort of investigate this kind of restless anxiety. And so as I was meditating, I thought about like these big programs that are about to launch, and kind of my desire for them to go well and my anxiety that they might not. And I began to recognize it and allow it, and then I began to investigate. And what I could feel inside was sort of like a holding or a tightness in my chest, kind of a feeling in my belly. This practice of rain is quite nuanced. There are a number of questions you can ask yourself. But one thing you can ask yourself is, what's the hardest thing about this? Or you can ask, well, how old is this feeling? And it was so interesting as I was really feeling these sensations, kind of in my heart, in my chest, and in my gut. And I asked that question, how old is this feeling? I realized it was really, really old. As a kid, kind of large family, busy, distracted parents, I never really felt seen or heard or acknowledged, never to my satisfaction. I don't know if any kid ever is. But the only way I really got attention was by accomplishing things. And so I became a producer. I got really, really good at sort of making big dramatic things happen, because that's the only way I would get attention. And I became aware of this kind of lifelong pattern over being very ambitious and then being really, really anxious that I wouldn't be able to make it happen. And then I would make it happen, and then I'd be looking for the next big thing that would make me nervous and anxious, and this kind of cycle of kind of chronic overreaching. I don't know if anyone here can relate to this. And so when I just felt this seed as a really, really young kid, and again, part of the practice of investigation is like, how vulnerable can I feel this? How intimately can I feel this? So as I hung out with this, just to see it clearly, it was then time to kind of explore the second wing of exploring how to hold this with some kindness or empathy. And there are a number of questions you can ask yourself. But one of the questions I asked myself was, what does this vulnerable place inside most need to hear right now? And kind of the spontaneous response was, you're okay. You were always okay. And it was a very powerful moment of just sensing that deep sense of there's something wrong with me. And I got to fix it by making sure I do something. And just letting it know you were okay and you were always okay. Life tends to go by really, really fast. We very rarely have time to pause and kind of slow down and really recognize and see what's going on. But when we can, it's possible to begin to sense more intimately what actually is going on. And how can I be with that? When we can do that, we can begin to feel a little more whole. And I found since that, just kind of a soothing of my anxiety that I found really helpful. So I thought we might close with a little meditation, a little reflection. And if you like, I'll kind of offer some questions that will sort of take you through some of these steps. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might like to slow down your breath just a little bit. And you may find it helpful to begin by bringing your attention to a focal point. It might be where you feel the breath the most predominant inside right now. Or it might be the sounds. Or just a sense of aliveness inside. And as we move into this short meditation, I find it very helpful to let go of trying to figure anything out, but just simply to get more familiar with it, to be curious about it. You might take a few moments and just reflect, what are the primary sources of stress in your life right now? Just take a little while to go through the files. What is the source of stress right now? And you might now begin to just think of one particular thing going on in your life that you might like to spend just a few minutes with. One particular issue. And the more specific you can make it, the better. And if you need a little more time, you can just raise one hand. So as you've begun to recognize this particular issue in your life right now, it might be helpful to bring it more alive by sensing if you can visualize it. If you're a visual person, you might see it as a still image or a moving image. Just an image that represents this issue. Are there any sounds that you associate with it? Any words or tone of voice, conversation? And you might now ask yourself, is it okay to be with this for the next few minutes? The A in rain, can you allow it? Can you accept it? And if so, you can begin to turn your attention to the investigation. And I'll offer a few questions and give you some time to explore. As you think about this issue in your life right now, what does it feel like on the inside? How intimately can you locate how this lives on the inside? You may feel it in the belly or the throat or anywhere throughout the body. Is there an emotion or an emotional word that resonates with this feeling? If it feels okay, is it possible to let this feeling get big? How big could it get? And what is the hardest thing about this? When you sense any vulnerability or sensitivity, what's this all about? Is there a sense of how old this is? investigation is this intention to become more familiar. And as you reflect now on the N of rain, is there a sense of the unmet need? Is there a sense of what this needs to feel more whole right now? A sense of what the most vulnerable place inside needs to be told right now. Can you imagine holding this in some kind of loving presence, some empathy or compassion? And as you do so, how does it shift or move or change? And if you like now, let all the techniques here fall away. And take this time just to sense what shifted. And can you sense this wing of awareness, the wing of wisdom, of your capacity to slow down, to see more clearly what is arising and unfolding in your life? And can you sense the potency of accessing a heart that can hold this? In these final moments, I'd like to share a short reading. It talks about this kind of final refuge of accessing loving presence. It's from Stephen Levine. It's entitled, "If Prayer Would Do It." If prayer would do it, I would pray. If reading esteemed thinkers would do it, I'd be halfway through the patriarchs. If discourse would do it, I'd be sitting with His Holiness every moment he was free. If contemplation would do it, I'd have translated the periodic table to hermit poems, converting matter to spirit. If even fighting would do it, I'd be a black belt. If anything other than love could do it, I would have done it already and left the hardest for last. As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can let your eyes open. The two wings of Vipassana meditation can be summed up in two questions, which you can ask yourself at any time. The first is, what is happening right now? And that question can take you through many, many layers. And the second question is, can I be with it? Or how can I be with this right now? And that question will begin to open you in a way that you can begin to be with and embrace what's here. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Mindful dialogue is happening now. And if you'd like to be in that focus group, please do sign up. And the best news of all, I saw the cookie and tea cart go by. So, yay. Enjoy. No class next week. I'll see you in 2 weeks if you can make it. Thank you.